What's going on, everybody? Welcome to You Are Not the Audience. Today I'm going to talk about why every great brand needs a subculture. That's a little bit clickbaity, but you get what I'm saying. So You're Not the Audience is a weekly live show where I break down brands, products, subcultures, and how they stand out by not appealing to everyone. This is a weekly live show we do here at Parliament. I am Calvin, creative director at Parliament, and Parliament is a brand transformation agency that helps brands facing big changes, and we help them discover the next version of themselves through strategy, positioning, identity, messaging, all that good stuff. And so today we are going to talk about what brands can do to also add their focus on a subculture inside of all of their brand work. So how's everyone doing today? Everyone good? I think I missed last week because I had some client stuff come up. So at this point, I feel like my weekly live show is becoming a bi-weekly live show. But that's a good sign. Everything's been busy lately. Parliament's been, we've been hustling the last few weeks, I feel like. So everything has been real nice. I like staying busy. It's summertime. It's good in Portland right now. How's everyone doing where they're at? Is it sunny? Nice? We've been dealing with like wildfire smoke here in Portland, which is not great, but thankfully it's mostly kept away. It's only been really bad a couple days. So today, it's just going to be a normal episode. We'll talk about just some fun news and obsessions lately. Then we'll talk about subcultures and branding, and then just wrap it up at the end. We'll go for an hour like normal. Should be good today. I think we'll just start while folks are rolling in. We'll just start talking some news and obsessions. Well, first, actually, let me pull up. So, the funnest thing that's been going on in Parliament is our founder, Chris Erickson, our founder, has been on a crazy epic journey. I'm going to pull up his Instagram really fast and see if I can find any cool imagery of what he's been doing. So Chris, our founder, decided to leave for a month and take his son to Mongolia, where they've been doing a crazy intense moto trip all across Mongolia, and I think they're doing like Korea and Japan too. Let me pull this up here really fast. And so this is Chris. If anybody wants to go check it out, I highly recommend it. This is his Instagram, but he's been posting all of these incredible stories from Mongolia. If it'll load, that's Chris. But they're just truly out nowhere. He's with some group that does these kind of like big motorcycle adventures, and so they're like shooting arrows out here. It's been a really awesome looking experience that they're out causing trouble. So they're like staying in all these like amazing places, great weather. So go check out Chris's Instagram, and you'll get some cool rides through all this stuff. It was just epic out there. Not a single tree, open fields, looks beautiful. So he's just been out causing trouble. So his Instagram handle is kind and humble. If anybody wants to go hunt him down. So that's been really cool to see. I always like seeing him go on his crazy adventures. He did like a month in like Southern Africa, I think last year, couple of years ago, I guess. So he has a tendency to vanish for a few weeks and go off on these crazy trips, which is awesome. So otherwise, my obsession lately, this is the other guys at Parliament are going to make fun of me for this, but I've been obsessed with this little book called Spine, Siderius Plug's Spine, Immortality in 99 Endnotes. So we're going to get really nerdy for a second. I have a soft spot for choose your own adventure books and things of that sort. Game books, people call them a lot. I've always wanted to do one for a brand. So if you're a brand out there and you want some kind of choose your own adventure book, let me know. This one is really interesting though. This is what you call a people get really, oh, Aaron, here we go. I just told Aaron all about this week. So this is kind of what people call like a solo tabletop role-playing game, but it's really just a book. There are a bunch of prompts in it that like tell you to write things or do things. So it's kind of almost like, I mean, a self-help prompt book, but it's all through a narrative. And so in this one, like a family member has died. The only thing in their will that they've sent you is this book, and you are a researcher who then needs to like read this book and respond to it, basically. But slowly over time, you start losing yourself in the book. So you are this character, you're reading the book, but the book is awesome. There's just like a ton of like random ephemera in it. This is like the title page, or like all the credits page. And then as you're reading the book, you know, there's all these little things in here, just great, interesting storytelling happening in here. And so you're essentially reading these small novellas, and then the novellas have endnotes in them. And when you hit an endnote, you go to the back of the book and read the endnotes, which give you prompts to do things to the book. So, for example, here's a good page. Like, this is like one of the very first pages. You know, it tells you to write things in the margin, tells you to do drawings, and tells you to actually even destroy parts of the book. And the goal over time is that you'll read through the book, destroy it slowly, write it, and then you hand it off to another person. It can be played a few more times. So the book just like becomes this organism all to itself. So very nerdy, but I think that's doing some really interesting things. I am just such a sucker for game books like this. So I'm always trying to think about like, can I do something like this someday with a brand? And so yeah, anyone out there, let's do it. Okay. All right, Aaron, you've been saved. That's enough nerd. That's enough nerd talk for the day. There's a chance I'm gonna try and hang in there with it today. There's a chance my voice starts going out. I've been fighting off a cold all week, or bad allergies, something. I think it's a cold at this point. So sorry to anyone I was around and got sick now this week. Not great. But worst case scenario, I'm just going to have a really raspy, like Tom Waits voice by the end of this. Okay, let's get into it today. I want to talk about how brands can focus on building not only just an audience, but a subculture. So let's build a subculture, not an audience today. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. As at Parliament, we do a lot of, you know, a part of our brand strategy work is helping people define audience, like who their really like big radical buyer is, like the person that just gets them. And it's maybe helpful to think about like the different types of audience personas and things we can pull together here. So the normal persona like style of targeting an audience is the persona style that we all know, and that's like demographics. That's like the stats, who they are, ethnicity, how much money they make, where they live, all of that kind of stuff. Demographics are fine. They don't actually tell you a lot about how a person behaves. And so what we tend to focus on at Parliament most of the time is psychographic personas. Psychographic personas are rooted in a person's actual emotions and behaviors, and it's usually also tied somehow directly to our brand archetype. So, you know, those 12 big stories that are all universal, those brand archetypes, whether you're like a rebel or a hero or a creator, those kinds of things. Usually our persona is like a person who falls into one of those buckets, and it kind of captures what they desire, their fears, what we provide to them. That's a pretty common psychographic persona. But the reason I have been thinking a lot about subcultures lately is because subcultures start defining where that person exists in the world and the group of people they belong to and the places they belong to. So, you know, when you think of like, when you think of just like, there's, well, actually, let's talk about like actually what a subculture is, how I'm defining it first. We all kind of get the idea of a subculture, like punks, metalheads, those are subcultures, you know, but everything kind of has its own little subculture. So really all a subculture is is a group of shared beliefs, a shared aesthetic, shared language, rituals, symbols, all of those kinds of things, and a group that stands behind them and implies meaning into all of those things. The other really important part about subculture is they usually share heroes and enemies and like sacred third places. So, and that sacred third place could be like, if you're a punk or metalhead, it's a music venue. If you're like a hardcore Patagonia like outdoor environmentalist, it's the outdoors. Like there's all those, and you share heroes and enemies in that world. So, you know, for example, like Harley's, like here's a great example of how these things all line up in different ways. So like demographic wise, if we're talking about Harley, like Harley's demographic is actually like upper middle class professionals with money, because Harleys are expensive. But their actual subculture, once you stretch all the way to that, is Harleys for rebel bikers who are against the daily grind and the status quo. And it's focused on freedom, brotherhood, and the open road. And so that connects your actual customer persona to this really aspirational subculture that they might not like be deeply ingrained with, but they desperately want to be deeply ingrained with. So it is like an aspirational desire to become part of that subculture. So Aaron in the chat, he's an ultra marathon runner, which is its own very nerdy specific subculture of people. We all have these things. And so sorry to call you out, Aaron, but you ultra marathon runners, you're all crazy. So Aaron, if you're staying on for a while, I'll probably end up asking you what are some of the symbols or the rituals of your marathon runners, beyond your marathon runners group, beyond just going on marathon runs. We're the worst. Can confirm you are the worst. Okay, so that's kind of like what a subculture is. It's just a group of people who like share a lot of the same beliefs, essentially. Like down to kind of to their core being. The way we think about, like the way I think about this, and the way it started coming up for me was we do this persona work, and that answers who are they? Just who are they as a person? The archetype that we then, the brand archetype that we like really defines what motivates them at their core and what worldview connects them with others. And then the subculture just explains how that worldview shows up amongst actual people. And where does it show up? So, you know, for like that subculture wise, you see punks wearing similar clothing, patches, they're like anti-authority. But then there's like other subcultures, like we don't think of this as subcultures because we always associate subculture with counterculture. And subculture in this sense, like you've got like Etsy moms and dads, like people who are just like looking for financial and creative independence through their craft focused hobbies. Like that is a very specific subculture of people, and they all meet in the same place. They're all on Etsy. They have like similar things. So like there's different subcultures like that. I mean, where I started thinking about this a lot was we did work for a mezcal brand called Peloton de la Muerte, and we really wanted to target like, we really want it to be like the bartender's mezcal, not fancy, not top shelf, none of that, but it's like when in doubt, reach for this mezcal. And so our subculture that we were targeting was like bad boy and bad girl bartenders with taste. Like that was really our focus. And I'll show you kind of even just how that came about. We didn't even actually end up using like subculture specifically. We didn't call that out in the branding or anything, but I can show you what that looks like. So here's where it started coming up. So I don't know if I'm supposed to show you a sneak peek of this, but it's fine. Peloton isn't going to care. So Peloton is rad. They've been around. They're a mezcal brand that's been around for a long time. They came to us to help tighten up their brand strategy and do some identity work for them. They kind of ran their own way and went off. It's a long story. Their final stuff, unfortunately, does not look like this. That's what I'll say, which is a bummer because it looks super cool. So this is where Peloton was going. we did like this really like rebel focused brand. Peloton stands for like Peloton de la Muerte means the death squad, which was tied to the Mexican rebellion. Really badass history behind the brand. There's like a flag with this skull and crossbones on it. So it's like really was meant to be like this like rebel outlaw. We are the rebel. We're tied to like these kinds of like badass like rebels that have belief behind them. And so as we started breaking down their audience, we noticed this thing, and this is like pretty common in marketing and brand strategy, where I kind of already talked about it with Harley, where you have your like your aspirant, your like primary consumer. That's this person in the middle. Like for Harley example, it's like like upper middle class professionals who have like excess money to spend on something as expensive as a Harley, but they're aspiring to be the insider, which is on the left here. And that insider in this case is like that rebellious, that like bad boy bartender who's like tattooed up, stays up late, but also like has a little bit of like taste and responsibility. They're charismatic. We feel like they are cool. That's a very rough way of talking about. But so that starts like once you do that, when you start realizing like you have this main consumer who's aspiring to be this like smaller demographic, like smaller percentage of your actual audience, that means we're targeting some kind of specific subculture right there. Like this person, our main consumer is a weekend warrior. They're probably a professional. They are like, they got their shit together in life, but on the weekends, they want to kind of feel like they're a little bit of that righteous rebel, you know? So that defines our subculture a lot. And the other thing that subcultures then do really well is it gives you a person to not include as well. We'll talk more about this later, I think, but subcultures also tell you who are not your audience. This is part of the like heroes and enemies part of this. So like in this case, our heroes are that insider, and our enemies are skeptics of mezcal who think it's like too smoky, who are just like kind of don't get it. So like that gives us permission to be like, they aren't included, they aren't a part of our subculture, and that's okay. Like it's not always bad to be a gatekeeper. That's gonna come back to bite me someday. But so this is where it came from, was working on Peloton. And I'll give you a glimpse of this stuff. This stuff, I love how this identity turned out. It was so fun, and unfortunately, it didn't totally end up this way. So cool, like very rebel, like rough type. All of this, it was very fun to make and work on. Had a cool mark that's rooted in the old flag that it was based on. So maybe someday I'll just put together a case study of this stuff just for fun. Great lines: take a stand, live free, die happy. This is the flag that it was kind of roughly inspired by. This is our take on it. So great vibes on this stuff. This one even said, some get it, others never will. That's like specifically targeting our skeptic right there. Some just don't get it. Okay. So, that's kind of like, I'm gonna keep thinking about that a little bit, or keep talking about that a little bit, is, well, thinking about subcultures like this helps us do, is it helps you find your people, not just your customers. So it kind of pushes you to think about it this way. Oh, we got fuel in the tank here. What's your experience been phrasing it as exclusion versus not our focus? Seems like marketers would hate the idea of excluding anyone. Oh yeah, I mean, we bump into that all the time. I think that's actually the interesting thing. Like we do that with brand strategy all the time. We deliberately put nopes, we call them nopes all the time, in our audience. And there's something about putting it in a formal document like that that makes marketers be like, okay, it's been officially decided on. But like, I think you definitely are right when you tell a lot of marketers that like, we can't target everyone. We can't do just like this broad swath. They get like a little bit back. They're like, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? But when you tell them, remind them that like, we always need to be speaking to that like radical buyer, that person who's like right in the dead center of our audience, that like is the aspirational insider of our target, I think that really helps them, because then you give them permission to like not waste time and money on those other people, because that's usually all those other people end up being. Like when you have a nope, you're just wasting time on money. Like the mezcal one is a great example, because like you have people that you might think align with it, but it's just like they just don't like mezcal. This is a very simple one because it's like a consumer good that people just either love or hate. But I think it just gives them permission to be like, focus, don't waste money there. And that's the way you always get a marketer, is like, don't waste time or money on these people. But so I think it does give you permission to find your people and not just those like hunt for those customers. So I think the thing that I always like to ask is like, essentially stop asking just who is going to buy this. That doesn't actually tell you a lot. Like, but if you start asking what group will care the most if we disappear, then you start getting somewhere of like really defining that group. And this is a thing we do a lot in our strategy work, where we kind of put that brinksmanship, where like, if we vanish, what happens? We do that when we're talking about mission, we're talking about vision, when we're talking about behaviors in a company, like the actual values behind a company. We always ask them like, when we're talking values behind a company, we're always asking them what is something you'd be willing to like, sorry, let me back up. Values are like the way that a company behaves at their core. And all brands have values of some sort. And the way we always test if values are true is we ask them, what are you willing to lose money on? Like, you make decisions based on your values, and you know something is really a value if you're willing to lose money to stick to that value. And I think in this case, like when we're talking about subcultures, where you are asking a brinksmanship type question, like what group of people will care the most if we disappear, it forces us to kind of like take a step back and be like, if we disappear, like what void is left? And I think that just really heightens our perception of our end consumers, of our products, and the groups that we belong to. But yeah, Ryan, fuel in the tank. It's talking about exclusion is hard. I think it almost becomes a little bit necessary when you're talking about subcultures, because it's inherently like a cliquish, gatekeepy kind of thing. But I don't think that's always bad in a lot of these situations. I'll kind of talk about that at the end, because I think that is one of the potential pitfalls. But okay. So you're working towards defining your subculture. Like, for example, we're targeting this like kind of like slightly divey bartender with taste for Peloton, things like that. The cool thing is that once you start defining that subculture is that it starts actually telling you how your brand should behave, how it should interact with that world. So, for example, when you have like, I've shown you some mountain bike branding stuff, like Marzocchi, Raceface. They're all these companies that make cool mountain bike gear. Personas might just tell you something like, when you're a mountain bike brand, like, oh, like Sarah loves authentic experiences. And you're like, okay, I get what that means, I think. But when you focus on the subculture, it actually starts telling you exactly what that person genuinely cares about and all of the places they exist, and that gives you permission to lean into things. So if you're targeting like, if you're targeting mountain biking stuff, that gives you like stickers to slap on bikes. That gives you like big epic air competitions for bikes. It gives you zines that are part of these worlds. This gives you bike shops, the slang that they're doing, the geographic locations that they're focused on. That if they're like into, especially if they're like Marzocchi, that brand that you're doing, like they've got a love for like stoke and epic rides, and then there's just like, that then that is also about brotherhood in that group, like that like adrenaline junkie brotherhood that happens. So that you can immediately start assuming all of those things about people. And that's kind of where we start getting into like maybe some of that stuff where like the gatekeepy stereotype generalization stuff a person can actually be helpful. But we'll talk pitfalls later. And so the one challenge with that is that it's really hard to start finding like sometimes subcultures don't exist until someone creates them. That's how they work. And I think you get that with a lot of things. So like if your brand feels like it doesn't quite have a subculture that already exists, I think there's some, you know, and like most of the time we're leading into a subculture that already exists. Like Harley has those rebel bikers, Vans has skateboarding, Patagonia has outdoor environmentalists. Like those are all the like hardcore subculture that they lean into, and are kind of like augment, steer it elsewhere. And like I think a couple really good examples of that are CrossFit and Peloton. Peloton, the bike company, or the exercise machine company, not Peloton, the mezcal company. I mean, Peloton literally means like squad or battalion. So they even named, like the exercise bike company even named themselves after a squad. So I think, yeah, CrossFit and Peloton have done really, really incredible jobs at inventing kind of their own subcultures. And they've all done it in ways where they have like shared vernacular. CrossFit especially like has made like shared suffering a part of their culture. And it also, those things also like they're really about, CrossFit is really about defining a physical gathering place where you have that shared suffering. And Peloton did it in a way where like its name is Squad, it's all digital community, but it gives you a place digitally where you can lock in and like have that shared suffering and that shared like achievement with others. They also, you know, like they create their own aesthetics, their own beliefs through all of those things. I think they've done really good jobs at all of those things. I don't know how those things are doing these days in the post-COVID era. I feel like everyone got into CrossFit and got a Peloton bike during COVID. But anyone in chat get into CrossFit during COVID? I just had to start working out a lot. Okay. This does make me think, what had become everyone's like during COVID, what became your hobby that you didn't have before? Like everyone started baking sourdough bread. What was like the weird hobby you accumulated during COVID times? You probably fell into your own subculture for a little while that you didn't originally intend to. Okay. So whether you're falling into a predetermined subculture or you're creating your own subculture, one thing that all of subcultures always need, and we've talked about this a lot in our world building episodes as well, during some of those past ones, the idea that subcultures need rituals and symbols. And rituals are just like the routines, the events we do, the places we go, and symbols are obviously our logo marks, but also everything else associated with the aesthetic of our world. So, you know, for like rituals, Harley and those like mountain bike brands like Marzocchi that we've worked with and Raceface, they've got rides, rallies, bike customization. All of those kinds of things are the rituals of that world. And then symbols, though, symbols can definitely go beyond our logos, and they absolutely should. Otherwise, they're too thin. They're just a veneer. You know, for like Harley, you've got the aesthetic of like leather vests. You've got eagles. You've got the open road. These are all symbols of things that like imbue our brand with deeper meaning, and everyone starts recognizing them. So that's important to always remember, is that symbols go beyond just the like obvious branded elements. And that's even why, like, when we were doing the Peloton de la Muerte, everything was like, it should always look like wheat pasted protest posters. We should reference the actual flag that it's originally drawn from, the historical flag that it's drawn from, as much as possible, because that's like ingrained in like Mexican culture. There's little elements like that that like you need to literally lean into those symbols. Okay, this is my favorite thing. I've always had this thought. This is probably a branding hot take. I think all brands should have enemies. I think all brands should have a little bit of rebel in them. That's probably just my own personal preference. But I think subcultures, to some extent, always have enemies. There's always something you're fighting against. It might not be a specific person. It might be like a specific way of thinking. It might be something like that. And I think this is when you start getting into some of the challenges of thinking about subcultures, because I think there's inherent gatekeeping in it, intentionally or not. So, and I think a lot of that revolves around just any hobby, any really deep personal interest, is just the idea that like some people get it and some people don't, and that's okay. For example, like when we go to like an absolute classic subculture, when you think about like punk bands or something, like punk stands up for the working class, and mainstream music and the government are its enemies. Like, very simple. Granted, that is like very much a rebel brand, but then you go to like Marzocchi, the mountain bike gear brand, they just make shocks for bikes, but they're really like, they stand up for adrenaline junkies, and they're against nerdy tinkerers who want to min-max and like make the best out of everything. But they're also kind of like, here's another side of it, is like they're kind of against, this is a term that all the mountain bike guys use when we work with them, is like they're against dentists, which dentists was like slang that they use for rich guys with really fancy bikes who don't really know how to ride, and they kind of just get in all the like hardcore guys' ways when they're riding. So like that's kind of the mean side of it, but it really easily defines who you're not for. Like Marzocchi is about bombing big runs, big jumps, not caring, meat hucking. Like that's what they also got. It's like you're like throwing your meat off the mountain. And the people who don't do that, dentists, because they're just like guys with fancy bikes that they just want to tinker with. They don't get out and ride much, and it's like they are in it for like that adrenaline, like that like carefree adrenaline thrill. So makes it very easy. And also like even to talk about like this idea of the subculture of like Etsy moms and dads, or like crafting folks like that, where it's like the idea of creative independence, they stand up for that, like finding creative independence through hobbies, and they're against soul-sucking 9-to-5s. Like that's a way you can appeal to those people, is because like that's why they're doing it. They want to make some extra cash, they have a really deep passion for something, and they're like not getting their fulfillment through whatever their normal like 9-to-5 experience is. And so, but since we're talking about like subcultures that might exclude others intentionally or not, that is both the power and pitfall of like stereotypes and generalizations that start happening here. And I think in the same way that we think of like gatekeeping isn't like always being potentially bad, I think it can be okay. It really helps us define who's into a hobby, who's not. We don't want to keep people out intentionally, but it kind of just happens naturally. But I think stereo and generalizations can be okay, or stereotypes and generalizations can be totally okay, because we kind of are all doing it anyway when we're creating personas for people, especially psychographic personas. You are making assumptions about how people behave, about their emotions. You might be extrapolating it from some data, but you might also just be going on instinct, like shared world instinct of like what we know about the world, what we know about the customer base, what we know about the brand. And we just kind of take that and extrapolate it out to whole subcultures. And there is always a whisper of truth in a lot of stereotypes. That's kind of what makes them both really powerful, but also what can make them very hurtful, is because once you extrapolate it, it can go to an nth degree that becomes bad. So that's the thing you always have to be really, really mindful of when you're thinking about subculture like work like this, or thinking about extrapolating off of some of those generalizations of a group that you're thinking about, is just know that once you extrapolate it out, it could be like go to a point where it is potentially problematic. So this is classic. This applies to all things. Don't be racist. Don't be sexist. Like those things get you nowhere. Those only end up breeding hatred for a brand and things of that sort, and just people in general. Don't be an asshole. Big brand statement this time. Hot take. Don't be an asshole. That's we need to do a deep insight article on the Parliament website about that. So, but I mean, like, I think what they're Ryan says, curious how subcultures evolve with Gen Z Alpha. Seems like the idea of labels as a whole are something that means less to them than millennials. You know, I mean, you're probably I'm curious what that looks like as well, because we're definitely getting to a deeper monoculture with the prevalence of social media. Things are becoming more and more homogenous. But I mean, there's always a group of people who are like, it's more tied around like passions, and everyone's passions are different, like no matter what. Like I think that's just maybe down to just a genetic thing, you know? I think there's probably some shared monoculture in like the way we experience things. There's definitely, we're in the time of echo chambers, but I think that we might find, I think there's like, for example, I've been talking a lot about like booze stuff and like booze, spirits, all of those worlds of like packaged like alcoholic beverage stuff. And there's like this really big idea right now that like, oh, like Gen Z and everyone, like they aren't drinking, like no one's drinking. And it's actually all bullshit. They are buying less, but they're still drinking like crazy. Like they're all investing in, rather than like fancy drinks and cocktails where everything's super expensive, they're still out there buying like, instead what they're doing is they're buying like malt beverages that are like 15% or ciders that are like 10 to 15%. Like they're trying to go for like maximum bang for your buck. So like I think that's like, in the end, we are still humans. We will always do what humans do, even as our AI overlords slowly crush us and make us all into their machines. But that's another conversation. So, yeah, I am curious how like the idea of like, I think you are onto something where you're thinking about like labels, how our like meaning for labels are changing. But I think it's just maybe like we just invent new labels, just like new slang, and there's new groups of people, all those things come about. So I think they'll be there. At some point, though, we will just be too old where we just no longer understand their categorizations or their labels or things like that. So that is the challenge. But okay, so I think that is. I mean, I guess let's talk a little bit more about like, I think how there can be some pitfalls to this, because I think one thing that starts happening, I think if you don't truly respect the subculture, the stereotype you're relating to, the generalizations you're making, like you can respect those things. And I think it's very obvious when you don't. So like the big pitfall here is if you don't respect the subculture, it looks like you're cosplaying. And that's when generalizations start to appear cynical, tone deaf, all of those things. And people can read that immediately. Like they immediately know when your love for a space is not authentic and it is just manufactured. So I think that is the one thing, is that like whatever brand you're working with on this stuff and whatever brand you run, like you have to actually truly believe and respect the thing that you are focusing on, the culture that you are like existing within. And this goes back to like the classic, like you still can't like create conviction and vision within a company. That kind of has to exist there. We run into this all the time where we work with companies, great companies making incredible stuff. And once you get in deep with them, you realize that their target, they keep kind of struggling with the target because the conviction isn't there. And so sometimes you have to remind them of that conviction. That's our jobs, is like remind them of the conviction, bring it up, bring that back up to the surface and get them reinvigorated on it. But sometimes it's just not there. And so you have to kind of work around it. So I think you do need quite a bit of conviction as a company to really respect and focus on like your brand subculture. Okay, I tried my best at coming up with like what I think of like the framework is for this. Oh yeah, Ryan, Fuel in the Tank. Authenticity, thankfully, still feels like the ultimate metric, especially as the world is becoming so fake. Oh man, I'm so I'm so curious about like how our takes on authenticity and brand is going to change over the next 10 or 20 years, because I mean, honestly, maybe next few years, because we had such a, you know, during like the millennial branding period of the last 20, 25 years, authenticity was such a thing. It was like, take a generic consumer good and invest in it like in a deep spiritual level and make it more authentic. That was the trick for the last 20 years, and it worked pretty well for a lot of brands. But now that we're going into a world where anything could be fake and seem real, I think we're going to get even bigger payoff for going hardcore authentic, but I think it's going to be even more difficult for brands to do it and not lean into things that are like fake, or like, you know, it's like it takes that conviction. You have to reject something in order to have conviction. Okay, so I was like writing down, I was like trying to think of like what is the framework for defining this subculture in your brand. I probably should have put this together. I just have bad notes, so I won't share this, but like here's the way I think about this framework and how you get to defining that subculture for your brand. This is my rough process, trying to finally like put my thinking into a process, which means it'll probably change in like a week. But this is how I think about, or this is how I think you can go about using this little framework for creating your sense of belonging in your brand. So it always starts with the belief. That's the conviction. Starts there. Like, what in our brand, what do we believe that others really rally around? Like, what is that deeper thing that we all believe and others believe? So that leaves you the next one. So we've got belief. We've got then the people who already believes this. Like, who out in the world already identifies with the conviction and belief that we should have as a brand. Then you question, like, what is their culture? Like, what is the culture that we already exist in? What slang, rituals, and symbols do they use that we also align with? Then the question is, like, what are you giving back to them? What do you provide that culture? Like, what can our brand give them that makes their lives better? If you can't answer that, like what our brand provides, that's why if you look on our personas that we currently have at Parliament, every single one has a very clear section. It's like what we provide to that persona. Because if you can't do this, you got nothing. The next is, what are the places and things they revolve around? What products, places, experiences show that we get them and that we actually believe in and care about? And so that's like the noun. What are the nouns of your world? The places and things. And I think last one, I feel like this could be softened, but just enemies. Who isn't this for? Who are you against? You're not always necessarily against someone. You might be against something. There might be something you're just kind of naturally opposed to or naturally like opposite of. But I think defining who your enemies are is really good. And I think in very black and white terms, so I like using the term enemies. Makes it much stronger, much sharper, much focused. So I think that's kind of the stuff. If you can define the like belief and conviction, the people, the cultural elements, like the cultural artifacts, you know, that's the slang, rituals, symbols, how you give back and provide what you provide to them, the nouns, the places and things, and then finally the enemies. I think that gives you like a pretty strong worldview for a brand. And I think that could work. I'm going to start testing this as we move forward. Like, I want to start actually putting these into some strategy documents, see if they work. We talk about this stuff all the time to get to sharper personas. But I think it might be helpful to start including in documents. And I think one way that I think it becomes helpful is the way we currently do psychographic personas. You kind of saw that glimpse there in the Peloton one. I'll just pull it back up again. Where, you know, you saw here, like we often do, this isn't quite our normal spread. We'll usually have like 3 to 5 people broken out on here. And we have our like radical buyer that's in the middle. We have our like core people that are important to the brand. And then we might have some like fringe people, maybe some nopes. It kind of depends on the brand. But I think what the subculture gives us is kind of we've called them in the past, we've done this where we kind of like define them as super personas. that are like, hey, here's the individual personas, like the psychographic personas, but then the super persona or the subculture they all exist within is this. Like, all of these people identify with this subculture. So I think we've done some stuff like that before, but I'm looking to finally like maybe start formalizing this. So this is how we this is how we end up like changing our strategy documents. But Ryan said, authenticity, thankfully, still feels like the ultimate metric, especially as the world is becoming so fake. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I'm gonna actually probably be talking about authenticity and timelessness next week. I think those have come up some, but I've been trying to think about like what those things are a little bit more and why they stick around. So we'll probably talk some about that. But so yeah, so I think that's kind of some of the framework I'm thinking. How do we define this like super persona, this subculture that includes all of our like psychographic personas that might fall within our brand? So maybe I'll share around this little framework. I'll tighten it up and share it around on the internet somewhere. See if it makes sense. Maybe I'll just do some short videos to talk about it, so it's a little bit more palatable. You don't have to sit here and watch me read watch me read notes and talk for an hour. So yeah, I think just kind of some final thoughts on subcultures. Like, just keep thinking about how there is that pattern of like demographics lead to psychographics, which leads you to an archetype that really drives them and motivates them. And then finally, like, what subculture does all that stuff exist within? There's a little bit of a pattern there that you can go through. Yeah. All right. For anyone in chat, what was the weird hobby you got into during the COVID days? What subculture did you accidentally find yourself within? For me, I was definitely in it before. I was like a board game nerd. That's things like this. Things like Spine. I was definitely a game nerd, but it just like exploded during COVID when it was just like locked in your house, get away from screens, where you're like attached to your screen, working from home all the time. Yeah. Oh yeah, Ryan, fuel in the tank. Nothing crazy, lots of cocktails, bar nerd stuff. Oh yeah. Same, because like since we couldn't go out, especially in Portland, where we were so locked down for so long in Portland. Like, I just missed having a nice cocktail so bad. It like started, I mean, this is actually just very sweet and I really love this, but like right when COVID hit, literally like basically the same month, my wife and I bought a new house. It was torn apart. And like tore the house apart. Everything was a mess. We're both working from home, remodeling our house. We're trapped inside the house because of COVID. And at some point we just started doing like date nights where we'd like trade off. We'd have like we have a kitchen island, and we'd trade off, like one of us was the bartender, one of us was the customer, and we would just like, what do you want to drink? And we would make each other cocktails. And so I definitely got into some like cocktail nerdery then too. That was such a wild time. Yeah, so it was like any recreation of real life during then. Yeah, Aaron, you already talked about it. Yeah, Aaron got really into marathon running. And just, yeah, you really went for it. Aaron, you're free to give that up now. COVID's long gone, you know. You can just relax now. You don't have to run. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good one. We're also, I mean, we're in our 40s now, so you need to have like some kind of hobby that becomes healthy for you, I guess. Sweet. Okay, I mean, I think we can probably wrap it up for the day. I think that's some final thoughts on subcultures. So, I mean, this is definitely, you know, the clickbaity version of this is like, stop thinking about subcultures, not your audience. Like that would be my clickbait version. But I think just starting to think about how your audience actually exists within a group of people already. I think we often, especially as branders, and we don't like to think about the generalizations that our audience exists within. We feel okay about doing about like very specific emotions, personal drivers, but I think it's really powerful once you start thinking about like, where's the groups that they already belong to. And that gives you a whole world of vernacular, those rituals, those symbols, all of those things that you can start leaning into. I think it's also just very fun to do that. I think that's where like world building starts, which we've talked a lot about. This is like, once you tap into that subculture, it starts giving you just a recipe for how to build a world for your brand. And I think that's a pretty good start. So, okay. I think next week, already hinted at this with Ryan in chat. I think I'm more specifically thinking about timelessness than authenticity. But this is just something I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially as, I've done episodes now about like the Wipeout branding, Designers Republic, which their stuff shouldn't seem timeless, but somehow it is. And so I've been thinking about a lot about like why really great design ages slowly, and like trendy design obviously ages quickly. I don't really know. I think it's like, because we always like, I guess some designers with strong convictions, we often aim for timelessness, but why do some stick around? Why don't others? I think this is just something I've been thinking about a lot. We've talked things about like the Pizza Hut classic locations that have come back where they're like really amplifying the timelessness of the brands. Like, why do we resonate with that? I don't know if I have any clear ideas for that yet, but I think that's what I'm gonna dig into this week. You know, it's like, I think especially for designers, like, why does like Braun and Dieter Rams still feel contemporary to us? Like, why do those stick around? Why does like some old Japanese packaging stick around? Why that like 70s, I've got the book around here somewhere, the like old 70s NASA identity, why does that feel so classic? Why do those stick around? Why do like Swiss grid and typography designs stick around? So what conviction leads to that good design aging slowly over time? So Ryan, interesting subject. Does timelessness matter to people besides designers when brands now change so frequently? Yeah, I think that's kind of part of the reason I'm thinking about it is, I think timelessness is a word that brands and branders care about, brand and agencies care about, because it promises long-term value to a client, and means, I should say, it's essentially, it also means like economic and financial efficiency long-term. So that's, I think, the business side of it. But I think that is what I want to talk about a little bit, is like, what is the like consumer customer experience of those things? Like, why do I still want to buy Braun products even though Dieter Rams hasn't been there for decades? You know, like, what about that like long timeless history, even though their products don't really look like that anymore? Why does that stick with me? So yeah, I think that's what we're talking about next week. I will I'll post some things up. I might try to put together this little subculture framework I was talking about, see if I can make sense of it, share it in a video or share it online somehow. But yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for joining up. That's You're Not the Audience for the week. See you next Thursday at noon Pacific time. Thanks Ryan, thanks Aaron, appreciate you all being in the chat. Later.